When a giant man in a black hoodie walked into a CVS pharmacy late at night, nobody was supposed to notice him. He wasn't there to be a hero. He wasn't there to make anyone's day better. He was there because he couldn't sleep, and he needed melatonin. The same boring reason any regular person drives to a pharmacy at midnight. But then he heard something. A voice. A woman's voice, coming from the back of the store near the pharmacy counter. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but it had something in it that made the giant man stop moving completely, stop breathing, almost. Right there in the vitamin aisle, under the bright white lights. The voice belonged to a mother. Her name was Rosalind. She was 34 years old. She worked 2 jobs, she had $43 in her bank account, and her 7-year-old daughter was at home right now, struggling to breathe. Her daughter's name was Amara. Sweet, bright, butterfly-obsessed Amara, who had a disease that made her lungs forget how to do their job, who needed a specific inhaler to breathe properly, whose inhaler had run out 2 days ago, whose insurance company had been sitting on a simple approval for 11 days. 11 days, while a little girl's chest got tighter and tighter. So Rosalind had driven to CVS at midnight with $43, knowing the inhaler cost $380, because she had run out of every other option and her daughter could not wait until morning. She stood at the pharmacy counter. She pressed her hands flat on the surface. She looked the pharmacist in the eyes through the scratched plastic window, and she said the only thing she had left to say. "Please, my daughter cannot breathe." The pharmacist felt terrible. He genuinely did, but the insurance approval wasn't there. The system said no. His hands were tied. He couldn't give her the medicine. And that should have been the end of the story. Except, in the vitamin aisle, 6 feet away, a very large man in a black hoodie had heard everything. He stood completely still for 90 seconds. 90 long, quiet seconds. And you might think, okay, famous rich guy, he's going to walk over there, pull out his credit card, make a big dramatic moment out of it. Cameras come out, everyone cries, the internet goes wild by morning. That is not what happened. What happened instead was something so unexpected, so quiet, so completely different from what anyone would have predicted, that when Rosalind finally found out the full story, weeks later, sitting at her kitchen table at 3 in the morning, she had to sit completely still for a long time just to take it in. Because this man didn't just pay for the medicine. He built something invisible, something that lived in the dark where no camera could find it, something that could activate at midnight when a mother had $43 and a daughter who couldn't breathe, and close the gap between what the system provided and what a child actually needed. And buried inside all of it was a message, 4 words, passed through a teenage cashier and a tired pharmacist, that made absolutely no sense to Rosalind when she first heard them. 4 words that would not leave her alone. 4 words that sent her searching the internet at 3 in the morning until she found a small article buried on the 3rd page of search results. And when she clicked on it, and read it, and understood what it meant, she sat up straight in her chair and felt the entire night rearrange itself into something she finally recognized. And then there was the letter, written in pencil, on wide-ruled notebook paper, by a 7-year-old girl who didn't know who this man was, didn't know his championships, or his movies, or his music, or his television show, knew only that he was very tall and very kind, and had helped her mama on a night when keeping going felt almost impossible. A letter that ended with something so simple, so small, so completely devastating in the best possible way, that when the giant man read it, sitting alone in his quiet office in Orlando on a Tuesday afternoon, he did not say a single word for a very long time. He just looked at the last 4 words Rosalind had added at the bottom of the page, in small, careful cursive, below her daughter's name. And those 4 words are the reason this story will stay with you long after it's over. Watch the whole video. Because what this man did that night, why he did it, where he learned to do it, And what a 7-year-old girl with a butterfly notebook said that stopped him completely silent. It all comes together in an ending that nobody saw coming. Not even him. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in February 2019, and Shaquille O'Neal could not sleep. This was not unusual. At 46 years old, sleep had become something he had to chase down like a loose ball in the open court. You had to work for it, and even then, it didn't always cooperate. He had tried the television. He had tried lying still in the dark, which lasted about 4 minutes before his mind started running plays on him. He had tried calling his daughter Tahira, but it was almost midnight, and she was a reasonable person who did not answer phones at almost midnight, which he respected. So he did what any reasonable 7-foot, 1,325-pound man does when he cannot sleep. He got in the car and drove to CVS. The drive from his home in Isleworth, the gated community in Windermere, Florida, about 15 minutes west of downtown Orlando, took him down Conroy Road and then south on Orange Avenue, past the fast food signs glowing orange and red against the dark sky, past the used car lots with their flags snapping in the February wind. Orlando in February could surprise you. People from up north always expected Florida to be warm and golden all year, like a postcard. But tonight, the temperature had dropped to 41 degrees, which was genuinely cold by Central Florida standards. And Shaq had grabbed a black hoodie from the hook near his garage door before he left. The hoodie was important, not because it kept him warm, it did, but that wasn't the point. The point was that a black hoodie pulled low over your face communicated something specific in a late-night public space. It communicated, "I am not here to be seen. I am here to buy something and leave." Most people respected that communication. Most people, when they spotted him anyway, would go wide-eyed and then look quickly at the floor, like they were trying to give him a gift by pretending they hadn't noticed. He appreciated that gift enormously. He did not take it for granted. He parked the SUV near the back of the CVS lot on South Orange Avenue, in a spot far from the entrance where the overhead light had burned out, and nobody had gotten around to fixing it yet. He sat in the dark for a moment, just breathing. The parking lot was almost empty. A rusted Civic near the entrance, a pickup truck with a cracked taillight at the far end. Quiet, still. The kind of quiet that only existed after midnight in a city like Orlando, when the theme park crowds had gone back to their hotels, and the real city settled into itself. He pulled the hoodie up and walked inside. The store smelled like every CVS on earth smells. A particular combination of plastic packaging, antiseptic, and the ghost of somebody's floral perfume that has been haunting the greeting card aisle for approximately 11 years. The fluorescent lights were the specific shade of white that makes everyone look like they are recovering from something. The music playing through the overhead speakers was a soft rock song from 1994 that Shaq could not name, but recognized in the way you recognize a face, without being able to place where you know it from. He nodded at the cashier near the front, a teenager, maybe 17, with a name tag that said Deshaun in block letters, who was restocking a display of Valentine's Day candy even though Valentine's Day was still 10 days away. Deshaun looked up, started to say something, then appeared to short-circuit completely when the full scale of the hoodie's occupant registered in his brain. His mouth opened. Shaq gave him one slow nod, the kind that communicated, "Yes, I know, please don't," and Deshaun, who was apparently a perceptive young man, closed his mouth and went back to the candy. "Good kid." Shaq moved down the center aisle toward the vitamin section, his sneakers quiet on the linoleum. He passed a man in paint-stained work boots, who was squinting at blood pressure monitors with the serious focus of someone making an important decision. The man didn't look up. Shaq passed a display of reading glasses and a rack of travel-sized toiletries, and a section dedicated entirely to products that promised to solve problems Shaq had never personally thought about. He found the sleep section and started scanning labels. Melatonin, that's all he needed. 5 milligrams. He'd been using it on and off for the last 2 years, ever since a team doctor at TNT's production offices in Atlanta mentioned it during a conversation about sleep cycles in former professional athletes. Shaq had not expected to become a melatonin person. He had, in fact, made fun of melatonin people at several points in his life. He was now a melatonin person, and he had made his peace with it. He was comparing 2 brands, one that promised gentle sleep support and one that promised maximum strength relaxation, and he was trying to decide whether he was a gentle support situation or a maximum strength situation when he heard the voice. It came from the pharmacy section, which was separated from the main store by a low partition and a sliding plastic window scratched from years of transactions. The pharmacy was still open, the overnight pharmacist's light was on, and there was a woman standing at the counter. Shaq heard her before he saw her. The voice was low, controlled. It had the particular quality of a voice that is working very hard to stay steady, pulling itself back from an edge with both hands. He had heard voices like that before. His mother, Lucille, had used that voice on phone calls when he was young. The voice she saved for landlords and bill collectors and school officials. The voice that said, "I am holding it together because I have no other option right now." "Please," the woman said, "I'm asking you. My daughter cannot breathe right now." The words landed differently than they would have in the daytime. Late at night, in an almost empty store, under fluorescent lights, with the soft rock music a distant murmur, they landed with weight. They landed like something real and heavy being set down on a hard floor. Shaq stopped moving. He was still holding the melatonin, the maximum strength one. He'd grabbed it without deciding, and he stood absolutely still in the vitamin aisle, not breathing particularly well himself, listening. He could see the back of her now. She was small, wearing a burgundy coat that had been washed so many times the color had gone uneven at the shoulders. Her hair was pulled back fast, the way you pull your hair back when you left the house in a hurry because you had to, not because you had time to think about it. She was maybe 5'4". She was leaning slightly forward on the counter, not aggressive, just forward, like she was trying to get as close to being understood as the scratched plastic barrier would allow. He couldn't see her face. He could see her hands. They were pressed flat on the counter, very still, and that stillness told him everything he needed to know about how hard she was working right now. The pharmacist, an older man, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, was speaking to her in a voice too low for Shaq to make out the words. But the tone was clear. The tone was apologetic. The tone was the sound of a person who genuinely wished they could do something different, and genuinely could not. Shaq stood there. The paint boots man had moved to a different aisle. Deshaun was still at the candy display up front. The store was as close to empty as a public space gets. Just Shaq and the woman, and the pharmacist, and the quiet and the particular grief of a mother standing at a pharmacy counter at 11:47 p.m., asking for help breathing on behalf of her child. He looked at the melatonin in his hand. He looked at the woman in the burgundy coat. He did not move yet. But something in the set of his shoulders changed. The way a man changes when a decision is beginning to form, even before the decision is fully made. Slowly, carefully. The way you move when you don't want to disturb anything. Shaq turned completely around to face the pharmacy section. The woman at the counter said something else, too quiet for him to hear the words this time. But he heard the breath she took afterward. The breath of someone who had run out of arguments and was down to the last thing she had, which was simply standing there and refusing to leave. Shaq knew that breath. He had heard it across kitchen tables, and in hospital waiting rooms, and in the apartments of people he grew up around, in Newark and San Antonio, and all the other places the Army moved his family. The places where nobody had a safety net, and the distance between fine and not fine was a single unexpected bill. He stood in the vitamin aisle of a CVS on South Orange Avenue in Orlando, Florida, at 11:47 p.m., holding maximum strength melatonin. And he thought about his mother, and then he began, very quietly, to think about what he was going to do. Her name was Rosalind Ferreira, and she had been awake for 19 hours. This was not, by the standards of her life, particularly unusual. Rosalind was 34 years old, and she had learned somewhere around age 27 that sleep was a negotiation, not a guarantee. You got what the day left you, and some days the day left you very little. Tonight, the day had left her nothing at all, and now she was standing at a pharmacy counter at nearly midnight, asking a tired pharmacist for something she could not afford, for a child who needed it to breathe. She had driven here from Pine Hills, the neighborhood on Orlando's west side that sat about 4 miles from the bright tourist corridors of International Drive, but existed in a completely different world. Pine Hills was working Orlando, the Orlando of second jobs and packed school buses and corner stores that sold loose cigarettes and churches that fed people on Sundays without asking their names first. Rosalind had lived there for 7 years, in a 2-bedroom apartment on Brentwood Circle, with faded yellow shutters, and a front step that tilted slightly to the left, and a landlord named Mr. Augustin, who fixed things eventually if you reminded him enough times. She had come to Orlando from Brockton, Massachusetts, in 2012, following a relationship that didn't survive the move and leaving behind a city that felt like it was closing in around her. She had a cousin in Pine Hills who said the weather alone would change her life. The weather was fine. Everything else took longer. She worked 2 jobs. During the week, she was a home health aide for a company called Sun Care Services, which placed her with elderly clients across the western Orlando area. She bathed people, administered medications, sat with people who had nobody else to sit with them. She was good at the work in a way that went beyond technique. She was present with people, which is different from simply being there, and her clients noticed. On weekend mornings, she handled invoicing and laundry coordination for a small residential cleaning company owned by a woman named Mrs. Baptista, who paid her in cash every other Friday, and sometimes left her a plate of food. Between the 2 jobs, in a good month, Rosalind cleared about $2,200. Orlando's cost of living had been climbing every year she'd been there. The math was always close. The math never had much room in it. Her daughter Amara was 7 years old, and she was the kind of child who made strangers smile without trying. She had her mother's wide-set eyes, and a gap between her front teeth that made every smile look like a small celebration. She loved butterflies, with an intensity that bordered on scholarly. She had a notebook where she drew them from memory, labeling each species in the careful block letters of a child who has recently learned that handwriting matters. At school, she was in 2nd grade at Millennia Elementary, where her teacher, Ms. Oduya, had written on her last report card, "Amara brings a quality of attention to the classroom that is rare and wonderful." Amara had been born with reactive airway disease. The diagnosis came when she was 14 months old, after her 2nd trip to the emergency room with breathing that sounded like wind through a cracked window. The pediatric pulmonologist at Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children, a silver-haired woman named Dr. Castillo, who spoke in the careful, unhurried way of someone who understood that parents were frightened and needed time to hear things, explained that reactive airway disease was the clinical way of describing what most people called severe asthma, but with a specific pattern of triggers and a specific way of escalating that required its own management plan. Cold air was a trigger. Respiratory infections were a trigger. Exertion could be a trigger. The wrong weather at the wrong moment could take Amara from fine to frightened in under 10 minutes. She had been hospitalized 3 times since she was 4. Rosalind knew the layout of Arnold Palmer's pediatric wing the way she knew the layout of her own apartment, automatically, without having to think about it. She knew which nurses let you bring outside food and which vending machine on the second floor got stuck if you didn't press the button with your palm flat. Amara's inhaler was a brand-name corticosteroid bronchodilator, a specific formulation that her current pulmonologist, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Mensah, had switched her to 8 months ago after the generic version caused Amara to vomit within 30 minutes of every dose. The brand name worked. The generic did not. This was not a preference. This was a medical fact documented in Amara's file. Florida Medicaid covered the brand name version. In theory. In practice, it required something called a prior authorization, a form submitted by Dr. Mensah's office to the insurance company, explaining in clinical detail why the brand name was medically necessary rather than the cheaper generic. Dr. Mensah's office had submitted the authorization 11 days ago. Rosalind had called the insurance line 4 times since then. The first time she was told it was under review. The second time she was transferred to a different department, and the call dropped after 18 minutes on hold. The third time she was told to call back during business hours. The fourth time, 2 days ago, a man with a tired voice told her it was still pending and he could not give her a timeline. The inhaler ran out on a Tuesday. Rosalind had not told anyone at work. She had been managing, watching Amara carefully, keeping the apartment warm, avoiding cold air as best she could, in a February that had turned sharp and mean. She had 1 partial dose left in an old canister, and she had stretched it over 2 days, giving Amara half a dose in the morning and half at night, and telling herself the authorization would come through any day. It had not come through. Tonight, at 10:04 p.m., Amara had woken up from sleep with that sound. Rosalind knew the sound. It was the sound that put her feet on the floor before she was fully conscious. A thin, reedy wheeze that threaded through each breath, like a wire pulled too tight. She had gone to Amara's room and found her sitting up in bed with her hand on her own chest, the way children do when they are trying to understand something their body is doing that frightens them. "Mama," Amara had said, "it feels like there's something sitting on me." Rosalind had used the last of the old canister right then. It helped a little. Not enough. She had called Tiana, the 17-year-old who lived 2 doors down with her grandmother, a serious girl who babysat Amara sometimes for $10 and a plate of whatever Rosalind had cooked, and asked her to come over. Tiana came in 3 minutes, still in her pajamas, carrying her school backpack for reasons that were unclear but felt very Tiana. She sat on the couch next to Amara, opened her backpack, and began doing homework as though this were a completely normal situation, which in its way was the most comforting thing she could have done. Rosalind had driven to CVS because it was the nearest pharmacy open at that hour. She had driven with $43 in her checking account and a phone that was at 11% battery because she'd forgotten to charge it, which felt like the universe being petty on top of everything else. She knew the inhaler cost $380 without insurance coverage. She knew this because she had looked it up on her phone in the parking lot before coming inside, as a form of preparation, the way you prepare yourself for news you already suspect is bad. The number sat in her chest like a stone. She had come inside anyway. Because Amara's chest was tight and the old canister was empty, and sometimes you walked toward the thing that frightened you, because standing still was not an option. Gerald Okonkwo had been the overnight pharmacist at this CVS for 6 years. He was 58 years old, originally from Enugu, Nigeria, and he had worked in pharmacy for over 3 decades across 3 countries. He had a calm, methodical manner and a habit of listening to people fully before he spoke, which made him either a very good pharmacist or a very good person, and in Gerald's case it was both. He had 2 daughters in college. He worked the overnight shift 6 days a week because the differential pay was better and because he had discovered over the years that people who came to a pharmacy in the middle of the night were usually people who genuinely needed help, and he found meaning in that, even on the hard nights. He recognized the situation the moment Rosalind approached the counter. He had seen it before. Not this woman, but this situation. The controlled voice. The specific way a person holds their body when they are exhausted and afraid, and refusing to let either of those things show more than they have to. He listened to everything she said. He asked 2 clarifying questions, both quiet, both respectful. Then he pulled up her daughter's file and confirmed what she'd told him. The prior authorization was pending, not denied, not rejected, pending, which meant the medicine could be approved any moment. It also meant it had not been approved yet, and he could not dispense the brand name without that approval, and without insurance the cost was $380. He told her this with genuine regret. He was not a bureaucrat reading from a script. He was a person telling another person a hard thing and wishing he did not have to. "Is there nothing?" Rosalind asked. Her voice had not broken yet. She was holding it together with both hands. "Any sample? Any program? Anything at all?" He had already checked. The sample stock of this particular medication had run out 3 weeks ago, and the next shipment wasn't due until Monday. The manufacturer's patient assistance program required an application that took 4 to 6 weeks. There was nothing in the system he could reach for tonight that would solve tonight. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Ferreira," Gerald said, and he meant it completely. "I would suggest the emergency room. Arnold Palmer is 17 minutes from here, and—" "I know where Arnold Palmer is," Rosalind said quietly. Not unkindly, just factually. The way someone speaks when they have visited a place enough times that the directions feel unnecessary. She thought about the ER copay. She thought about leaving Amara longer. She thought about Tiana on the couch doing homework in her pajamas, which was wonderful. But Tiana was 17, and this was already midnight. She thought about the $43. She thought about the car payment that was due on the 18th. She thought about Dr. Mensah's office, which would be closed until 8 a.m., which was 8 full hours away. She pressed her hands flat on the counter. She looked at Gerald Okonkwo through the scratched plastic barrier. And then she said the thing she had been trying not to say. The thing she had held back through the whole conversation, because saying it out loud made it too real and too frightening. "She cannot breathe, sir. That's my baby. She's 7 years old and she cannot breathe. And I have $43, and I don't know what to do." Her voice cracked on the word breathe. Just once. Just a small crack, quickly sealed. But it was there. Gerald opened his mouth to respond. He did not get the chance. Because at that exact moment, something changed in the air behind Rosalind. A shift, a presence. The way a room changes when something large and quiet moves within it. She didn't turn around. She was too tired to turn around. And whatever it wasn't her problem right now. Her problem was in front of her, behind a scratched plastic window, measured in milligrams and dollars, and the sound of her daughter's breathing. But Gerald looked up, and something crossed his face that Rosalind could not read. Something between surprise and recognition, and a careful, practiced blankness. The look of a man who has decided very quickly to pretend he has not just seen what he has seen. He looked back at Rosalind. "Ms. Ferreira," he said slowly, "would you mind giving me just one moment, please?" She nodded. What else was there to do? Behind her, in the vitamin aisle, something was happening that she could not see. She stood at the counter with her hands flat, and her coat too thin for the February cold that was leaking through the automatic doors. And she waited. She was good at waiting. She had been waiting 11 days already. She did not know that the waiting was, at this very moment, almost over. Shaq did not move immediately. This was the part nobody would have expected. Not the fans who watched him command an entire paint with the authority of a man who had never once doubted his right to be there. Not the television audiences who saw him fill every room he entered with noise and laughter and the particular energy of someone who had been performing since he was old enough to understand that performance was expected of him. They would have expected him to move. They would have expected the big dramatic gesture, the long stride to the counter, the hand on the shoulder, the produced credit card. the moment. Instead, he stood in the vitamin aisle and did not move for what felt, in the specific time arithmetic of a quiet late-night store, like a very long time. 90 seconds, roughly. He counted without meaning to, the way athletes count things automatically. The body keeping time even when the mind is somewhere else entirely. He was somewhere else entirely. He was in Newark, New Jersey, in an apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Sussex Avenue, watching his mother Lucille on the phone. He was maybe 9 years old in this memory, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal that had gone soft because he'd been sitting there long enough for it to go soft, and his mother was standing with her back to him, facing the wall, speaking to someone in that voice. That particular voice. The one that was controlled and careful and cost something to maintain. You could hear what it was costing her, if you listened closely, which young Shaquille had, because children always listen more closely than adults expect them to. He didn't know then what the call was about. He had figured it out later, in the way you reconstruct your childhood from the adult side. It was a bill, probably. Maybe the electric. Maybe something for his younger siblings. His stepfather, Philip Harrison, was Army, and Army families moved constantly and lived on structured pay that didn't flex for emergencies. And emergencies happened anyway because they always did. What he remembered was his mother's hand on the wall, flat, pressed there for balance or for something to push against. And the way her shoulders were set, not defeated, never defeated. His mother was constitutionally incapable of defeat, but carrying something. Visibly carrying something that she would not put down and would not let anyone else carry for her if she could help it. He had never forgotten that hand on the wall. He looked at Rosalind Ferreira's hands on the pharmacy counter. Flat, still, pressed down in exactly the same way. He breathed in slowly through his nose and out through his mouth, which was something his trainer had taught him 25 years ago for the moments before a big game when the noise got too loud and he needed to find the quiet center of himself. He had not expected to need that technique in a CVS at midnight. Life surprised you. The hesitation was real, and he did not apologize for it, even in his own mind. He had learned, through specific, sometimes painful experience, that public generosity was a complicated thing when you were his size and his face and his name. There had been times over the years when he had reached toward a moment like this and watched it transform, almost instantly, into something he hadn't intended. A phone came out. Someone nearby recognized him a beat after he'd done something kind. And suddenly the thing he'd done wasn't the story anymore. He was the story. The size of the gesture got measured and reported and debated online by people who had not been in the room and did not know what the room felt like. He had paid off layaway accounts at a Walmart in McDonough, Georgia in December 2011. He remembered the specific store, remembered the specific Saturday, remembered the look on the face of the store manager who didn't know what to do with what was happening. That one had gotten out. It became news. Which was fine ultimately, and he had made peace with it. If it encouraged other people to do something similar, then the exposure served a purpose. But that was not why he had done it. He had done it because he walked into that Walmart and saw a woman quietly removing items from her layaway order one by one, doing the math out loud under her breath. And something in him simply could not walk past that. The problem was that every time it became a story, the next time became harder. Because now there was a version of the gesture that existed in the public imagination. The celebrity who swoops in. The dramatic reveal, the tearful thank you captured on someone's phone and uploaded before the parking lot. He did not want to be that version of the story. He wanted to be something quieter than that, something that didn't require a witness. This was the calculation happening in the 90 seconds. Not should I help. That question had answered itself the moment he heard Rosalind say, "That's my baby." That was never the question. The question was how. He looked around the store carefully. Deshawn was at the front, back mostly turned, focused on the candy display. The paint boots man had disappeared. He must have gone to a different aisle, or left entirely while Shaq was listening. Gerald Okonkwo had looked up from the pharmacy counter and then looked deliberately back down, which Shaq read correctly, as the act of a decent man giving him the gift of not being seen. The store's security camera above the pharmacy was angled toward the counter, not the vitamin aisle. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. He did not open social media. He did not take a photo. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a name. And here the story asks you to stay with the privacy of that name for just a moment, because this is the part that mattered most, the part that had nothing to do with spectacle. The contact was a woman, a doctor, someone he had known for several years through his foundation's work with Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children, the organization he had been connected to since his Orlando years, the hospital he had helped fundraise for, the institution whose pediatric wing had a particular place in his understanding of what his money and his name could actually accomplish when applied correctly. He pressed call. She answered on the fourth ring, which, given that it was approaching midnight, was already a kind of miracle, or perhaps just the result of being the sort of person who checks who's calling before they decide whether to answer. He spoke quietly. One hand cupped over his mouth and the phone, the way you speak in a library or a hospital, in a place where sound carries and privacy matters. He did not explain everything. He had learned over the years that the most effective version of asking for help was a specific ask, not a full account. He gave her a name. He gave her the situation in 3 sentences. He said please, which he meant, and he said thank you, which he meant, before she had even answered. The call lasted 44 seconds. When it ended, he put his phone back in his pocket. He stood in the vitamin aisle for 3 more seconds, looking at the pharmacy counter where Rosalind's hands were still pressed flat on the surface, where Gerald was speaking to her in low, apologetic tones that hadn't changed in register because nothing had changed yet. Nothing visible had changed. Then Shaq did something that would confuse everyone who heard this story later, including Gerald, including Deshawn, including Rosalind herself when she eventually pieced it together. He walked away from the pharmacy. He turned and moved up the vitamin aisle, back toward the front of the store, his sneakers quiet on the linoleum, the maximum strength melatonin still in his hand. He walked to the front register. He set the melatonin on the counter in front of Deshawn, who looked up at him with an expression that suggested his entire understanding of reality was currently being renegotiated. Shaq reached into his pocket and produced a $20 bill, which he set on the counter next to the melatonin. Deshawn stared at the 20. He stared at Shaq. He opened his mouth. Shaq put one finger to his lips. Deshawn closed his mouth. Shaq took his change and his melatonin and turned toward the door. He was almost through it. The automatic door had already begun to slide open, letting in a blade of cold February air. When he paused, he turned back to Deshawn, who was still watching him with the expression of someone who has just witnessed something they don't have the framework to process yet. Shaq leaned slightly toward him and said, quietly and clearly, "The woman at the pharmacy counter. If she needs anything else tonight, anything at all, you call this number." He said a number out loud, once, slowly. He did not write it down. He trusted Deshawn to hold it. Then he said something else. 4 words, spoken the same way his mother used to say them across kitchen tables and through apartment walls and in the dark hallways of military housing units in 3 different states. He said them the way they had been given to him, not as instruction, but as inheritance. Deshawn nodded, very seriously, like someone receiving a message that needs to be delivered intact. Shaq walked through the door. The February cold met him immediately, sharp and real, the kind of cold that reminds you that you are a body in a world that does not always accommodate bodies gently. He walked to his SUV in the far dark corner of the lot and got inside and sat there without starting the engine for a long moment, looking at the yellow light of the CVS windows across the parking lot. From here, he could not see Rosalind. He could not see Gerald or Deshawn, or the scratched plastic barrier, or the burgundy coat that had been washed one too many winters into a color that used to be something brighter. He could see the light. He sat with that for a while. Then he thought about something. A small, practical thing. The kind of detail that only occurs to you when the big gesture is already in motion and your mind relaxes enough to think one level deeper. He picked up his phone again. He sent a short text message. 3 lines, no punctuation, the way he texted, which drove his children absolutely crazy, to the same contact he had just called. He waited. The reply came in 40 seconds. 2 words and a thumbs-up emoji, which he took as confirmation. He started the engine. He was home by 12:20 a.m. He took the melatonin with a glass of water from the kitchen. He lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling of his bedroom, which was very high because it was his ceiling and he had requirements about ceilings. He did not think about what he had done in the way people sometimes replay their own good deeds, recounting them privately like a highlights reel. He thought about Amara Ferreira, whose name he now knew from the 44-second phone call, who was 7 years old and had something sitting on her chest and could not breathe right, and who by now, he checked his phone, 12:23 a.m., was probably breathing better. He thought about his mother's hand on the wall. He thought about flat palms and the things people press against when they need something solid. He closed his eyes. Behind him, at a CVS on South Orange Avenue, a phone was beginning to ring. Not the store line. Gerald Okonkwo's personal cell. Gerald Okonkwo had a rule about his personal cell phone at work. It stayed in his left breast pocket, on silent, and he checked it on his breaks and nowhere else. This was not a policy the store required. It was a policy he required of himself, because Gerald believed that the person standing in front of you at any given moment deserved the full weight of your attention, and a phone in your hand was an argument against full attention. He had raised his 2 daughters, Chisom and Adaeze, both now in college, both exhaustingly brilliant, by this same philosophy. When you are with someone, be with them. Everything else can wait. His phone had been in his breast pocket all night. He felt it vibrate at 12:01 a.m. He was mid-sentence with Rosalind, explaining for the second time the specifics of the prior authorization timeline, when the vibration moved through his chest like a small, insistent knock. He finished his sentence. He apologized to Rosalind with his eyes in the way that experienced people apologize. A slight softening, a small incline of the head, and he held up one finger. "One moment, Ms. Ferreira. I'm sorry." He stepped back from the counter and reached into his breast pocket. He looked at the screen. The number was not one he recognized, but the area code was 407, Orlando, and something about the hour and the specificity of the vibration, the fact that someone was calling and not texting at midnight, made him answer rather than let it go to voicemail. "Gerald Okonkwo," he said, the way he always answered unknown calls. His full name, stated plainly, like a fact. "Mr. Okonkwo, my name is Dr. Yemi Adeyemi. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist on staff at Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children. I apologize for the hour. I need 60 seconds of your time, and then I need you to pull up a patient file." Gerald went still. He had been in pharmacy long enough to know that unexpected midnight calls from physicians were either administrative emergencies or something else entirely, and the voice on the other end of this call was neither frantic nor uncertain. It was the voice of a person who was fully awake and fully purposeful. A person who had picked up her phone in the middle of the night and made a decision, and was now executing that decision with the calm efficiency of someone who made difficult decisions for a living. "I'm listening," Gerald said. Dr. Yemi Adeyemi was 41 years old, Nigerian-British, and had joined Arnold Palmer's pediatric pulmonology department 4 years earlier, after a decade split between Great Ormond Street Hospital in London and a research fellowship at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. She was small, precise, and held a reputation among Orlando's pediatric medical community for being the kind of doctor who answered her phone. Not just during business hours. Her phone. This reputation was not accidental. She had built it deliberately, over years, because she had seen too many cases where a child's condition escalated overnight simply because the right person had not been reachable. She was connected to the Shaquille O'Neal Foundation's Pediatric Health Initiative, a real and functioning network that operated through Arnold Palmer to provide emergency support for children's health needs in Central Florida. The network maintained a small fund that covered prescription costs in genuine emergencies, a fund that had been established quietly in 2016, with a donation that the foundation did not publicize, and Arnold Palmer acknowledged only in its internal accounting. The fund had one condition attached to it, insisted upon by its donor: no press, no announcements, no naming opportunities on walls or wings or waiting rooms. Just the money, doing the thing money could do when it was applied to the right problem at the right moment. Dr. Adeyemi had received a phone call from a mutual acquaintance 14 minutes ago. She had gotten out of bed, gone to her home office, opened her laptop, and pulled up every available database through her hospital credentials. It had taken her 9 minutes to locate the file, review the prior authorization request, assess the medical documentation submitted by Dr. Mensah's office, and reach a clinical conclusion that the request was entirely legitimate, completely straightforward, and should have been approved by the insurance company within 48 hours of submission rather than sitting in bureaucratic suspension for 11 days. She told Gerald this now. Not the full version. She gave him the version that was relevant to the next 5 minutes. Patient name: Amara Ferreira. Date of birth: current diagnosis, treating physician, prior authorization reference number. She told him she was processing an emergency physician override authorization through the hospital's credentialing system, which would appear in the pharmacy's insurance portal within the next 90 seconds. She told him the prescription cost would be covered through a patient assistance account that he would see populate alongside the authorization. Gerald was writing nothing down. He did not need to. 32 years in pharmacy had given him a memory for numbers and names that his daughters called mildly terrifying, and that he called simply professional. "Dr. Adeyemi," he said carefully when she had finished. "It is midnight." "Yes," she said. "I'm aware." "How?" he started, and then stopped, because he was a man who understood that some questions were better left slightly unfinished. "Someone asked you to help," he said. It was not quite a question. "Someone asked me to help," she confirmed. Her tone carried something in it. Not quite warmth, not quite amusement. Something in between. The emotional register of a person who has just done something that reminded them why they chose this work in the first place. "Please give the family my information," she said. "If Amara has any difficulty tonight after the medication, Dr. Mensah's exchange will reach me directly. And Mr. Okonkwo, I'll make sure the full authorization is processed through the insurance system first thing Monday morning. This won't happen to them again." She ended the call. Gerald stood behind the pharmacy counter for approximately 5 seconds, which in Gerald time was a significant pause. He was a methodical man, and methodical men sometimes needed 5 seconds to reorient themselves when the world behaved in ways that fell outside their established categories. Then he turned to his computer. The pharmacy portal refresh cycle was set to every 60 seconds. He refreshed it manually. He watched the screen. At 12:04 a.m., 2 things appeared simultaneously in Amara Ferreira's file: an emergency physician authorization carrying Dr. Adeyemi's credentials and Arnold Palmer's institutional stamp, and a payment confirmation from a third-party patient assistance account that Gerald did not recognize by name, but whose account number resolved correctly when he ran it through the system. The balance due: 0. He stood there looking at the 0 for a moment. In 32 years of pharmacy, the number 0 in the balance field had never moved him. Tonight, it did something to the back of his throat that he addressed by clearing it once, quietly, and adjusting his glasses. He prepared the prescription. His hands moved through the familiar steps with the automatic competence of long practice. The verification, the labeling, the safety check, the count. But his mind was moving on a separate track, replaying the last 14 minutes and trying to locate the shape of what had just happened. Someone had called a pediatric specialist at midnight. The specialist had gotten out of bed. A prior authorization that had been pending for 11 days had been resolved in 9 minutes by a woman at a laptop in her home office. A payment had arrived from an account Gerald could not name. And the man in the black hoodie had walked out of the store 7 minutes before any of this happened. Gerald was not a man who trafficked in coincidence. He walked back to the pharmacy window. Rosalind Ferreira was still standing at the counter. She had not moved. She had the posture of a woman who has decided that the only remaining strategy available to her is to simply remain present, to stand here, at this window, for as long as it took, because leaving would mean giving up, and she was not built for giving up. Her hands were still flat on the counter. Her coat was still burgundy and still one winter too old. Her eyes, when they met Gerald's, held the careful blankness of someone who has already braced for the next no. Gerald looked at her for a moment. He had told people bad news and good news across pharmacy counters for 32 years. He knew the particular responsibility of the good news, which people sometimes understood incorrectly. Good news, delivered poorly, could feel like cruelty, like something being dangled. He wanted to get this right. He wanted her to understand it fully before the relief arrived, so the relief would be clean and complete rather than confused. "Miss Ferreira," he said. His voice was steady and quiet. "Your daughter's prescription has been authorized. It will be ready in 8 minutes." Rosalind stared at him. He watched her process it. The slight narrowing of her eyes, the small recalibration happening behind them as her exhausted brain tried to reconcile what she had just heard with the last 11 days of experience. Authorized. Ready. 8 minutes. The words were simple, but they were arriving in a context that had trained her to expect their opposite. "I don't," she started. "What changed?" "A physician at Arnold Palmer processed an emergency authorization," Gerald said. "Moments ago." "Which physician?" "I didn't call anyone." "Dr. Adeyemi, pediatric pulmonology." Rosalind shook her head slowly. She had never heard the name. "I don't know a Dr. Adeyemi." "No," Gerald agreed gently. "I don't believe you were expected to." She looked at him for a long moment. "And the cost?" "Covered," Gerald said. "In full, through a patient assistance account." The word "covered" landed in Rosalind's chest, like something being set down gently after being carried too long. She felt it physically, a loosening, a release of something she had been holding so tightly for so many hours that she had stopped being aware she was holding it. Her eyes filled. She did not look away. She let it happen, because she was past the point of having the energy to manage it. "I don't understand," she said, and her voice was very small. "Who?" "I'm not entirely certain," Gerald said, which was technically true. He was approximately 95% certain, but the 5% was doing important work, and he respected it. He prepared the inhaler and brought it to the window 8 minutes later, exactly as promised. He went through the instructions carefully, even though she knew them. How to prime it, how to position the mask, how long to hold after each puff. He did this because it was his job, and because it was respectful, and because sometimes people in shock need the familiar structure of practical information to find their footing again. He put the small purple canister in a white paper bag and slid it through the window opening. Rosalind took it with both hands. She held it the way you hold something that weighs almost nothing but means everything, carefully, with full awareness of its value. And then Gerald remembered. He had almost forgotten, in the sequence of everything, the call, the authorization, the preparation, about the thing that had been said to him at the register. He had almost let it go, thinking perhaps it was not his to pass on. But looking at Rosalind's face now, at the tears drying on her cheeks and the confusion still sitting in her eyes, he thought that perhaps the message was exactly what she needed, even if she did not yet understand it. "Ms. Ferreira," he said. "A young man, the cashier, Deshawn, relayed something to me a few minutes ago, from a customer who was leaving." She looked at him carefully. "He said to tell the woman at the pharmacy counter." Gerald paused, making sure he had it exactly right, because it was the kind of message that needed to arrive exactly right. He said, "Mama said, keep going." Rosalind's face went very still. Not the stillness of incomprehension, something different. The stillness of a person who has just received a piece of information that their mind has no existing folder for, no category, no frame of reference. And so instead of processing it, the mind simply stops for a moment, the way a computer pauses before opening a very large file. "What does that mean?" she asked. "I'm afraid I don't know," Gerald said. She looked at the white paper bag in her hands. She looked at Gerald. She looked at the empty store behind her, the fluorescent aisles, the Valentine's candy display, the sliding doors through which a blade of February cold was faintly leaking. "Who said that?" Her voice was almost a whisper. Gerald considered his answer for a moment. Then he said, carefully and honestly, "Someone who didn't want you to know." Rosalind Ferreira stood at the pharmacy counter of a CVS on South Orange Avenue in Orlando, Florida, at 12:16 a.m. on a Friday in February 2019, holding a small purple inhaler in a white paper bag, with tears drying on her face and 4 words sitting in her chest that she did not understand. Mama said keep going. She turned and walked toward the exit. The automatic doors opened. The February cold arrived, immediate and sharp. She walked through it to her car. She had a daughter to get home to. The drive back to Pine Hills took 11 minutes. Rosalind knew this because she had driven it so many times that her body knew the route the way it knew other things learned through repetition, automatically, without consulting her conscious mind. Left out of the CVS lot onto South Orange Avenue, north past the shuttered barbershop and the Haitian restaurant that closed at 9, and the billboard advertising a personal injury lawyer whose smile was approximately 4 feet wide. Then the turn onto Colonial Drive, west through the amber wash of streetlights, past the check-cashing place and the dollar store and the Pine Hills Community Center, where Amara had taken a butterfly drawing class the previous summer and produced 17 pages of careful illustrations that were currently taped to the refrigerator at home. Rosalind drove the 11 minutes in a state that she could not have named precisely if asked. It was not quite calm, and not quite relief, and not quite confusion, though it contained elements of all three. It was the state a person inhabits when something enormous has just happened, and the body hasn't caught up to it yet. When the crisis has passed, but the muscles haven't received the memo, still holding themselves in the tight formation of emergency. The white paper bag sat on the passenger seat. She kept her eyes on it at every red light. Not consciously. Her eyes simply went there, the way eyes go to the thing that matters most in a room. The inhaler inside it was a small purple canister, roughly 4 inches long, weighing almost nothing. She had held versions of it many times before, in hospital rooms, in Dr. Mensah's office, in the cramped bathroom of this very apartment, where she had administered it while Amara sat on the edge of the tub and tried to be brave. She knew its weight and its dimensions, and the specific sound it made when you shook it to check the remaining doses. A small liquid shift, like a tiny ocean. She knew it with the intimacy of something that had, on 3 separate occasions, been the difference between her daughter breathing and her daughter not breathing. Tonight, she could not stop looking at it. Mama said, keep going. The words arrived again in the car, uninvited, the way certain phrases do when they have lodged somewhere they can't be reasoned out of. She turned them over. She looked at them from different angles, the way you look at an object you've found on the ground, trying to determine what it is, and where it came from, and whether it belongs to you. She could not make them make sense. The authorization she could partially understand. The medical world had its emergency systems, its after-hours protocols, its networks of physicians who sometimes intervened in situations that had fallen through the cracks. She had seen this before, at a smaller scale. Once, when Amara was 5 and hospitalized with a particularly bad episode, a nurse on the pediatric floor had made 3 personal phone calls to get a piece of equipment that was technically allocated to a different ward. People in medicine sometimes reached past the official channels because the official channels were not fast enough for the situation in front of them. So she could construct a version of tonight in which a pharmacist, moved by her situation, had called someone he knew at Arnold Palmer. A colleague. A contact. This version was incomplete and had several holes in it, but it was at least navigable. What she could not navigate was the payment. The zero balance. The third-party account that Gerald Okonkwo didn't recognize and that had appeared in the system within minutes of a midnight phone call. And the 4 words. Those 4 words that didn't belong to any version of the story she could build. She turned onto Brentwood Circle and pulled into her parking spot. The second from the end, the one she had claimed through the quiet territorial consensus of apartment parking lots, and sat in the car for a moment with the engine running and the heat on, looking at the yellow light in the front window of her apartment. Tiana had left the lamp on. That small detail, the lamp, the thoughtfulness of it, this 17-year-old girl leaving a light on so Rosalind would come home to something warm, broke open something in her chest that the entire pharmacy ordeal had not managed to break. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel for exactly 4 seconds. Then she picked up the white paper bag, turned off the engine, and went inside. Tiana Beaumont looked up from the couch when Rosalind came through the door. She was still in her pajamas, blue, with small white stars on them, and her schoolwork was spread across the coffee table in the organized chaos of a serious student. Textbook open, notebook to the left, highlighters arranged by color along the top edge. She had a habit, when she was working, of tucking one knee underneath her and sitting slightly sideways, like a comma. She looked at Rosalind's face, and then at the white paper bag, and something in her own face settled. Not quite relief, because Tiana was 17 and had learned to hold off on relief until she had more information, but something adjacent to it. "You got it," she said. Not a question. She could read the bag. "I got it," Rosalind said. Tiana nodded once, the nod of someone filing information correctly. She began gathering her schoolwork into her backpack with the efficient movements of a person who had been waiting to do exactly this and was now executing the exit she had prepared. She did not ask questions. She had an old soul's understanding of when questions were the right thing and when they were not. And this, Rosalind's face, the hour, the bag, the particular quality of the silence, was not a questions moment. This was a give her the room moment. At the door she paused. "She woke up once," Tiana said, "about 20 minutes ago. I gave her some water and she went back down. She sounded a little better." "Thank you, Tiana. You don't have to." "Thank you," Rosalind said again, firmly, because she meant it in the complete way, the way that needed saying twice. Tiana left. The door clicked quietly behind her. Rosalind went to Amara's room. The room was small, just wide enough for Amara's bed, a dresser with a butterfly sticker on the second drawer, and a small bookshelf that was mostly butterflies too, various picture books and reference guides that Amara had accumulated with the focused acquisitiveness of a person who has found their subject and intends to master it. A nightlight on the baseboard cast everything in a gentle orange glow. On the wall above the bed, Rosalind had taped 12 of Amara's butterfly drawings. Not the newest ones, not necessarily the best ones technically, but the ones she had found Amara working on with the most complete absorption. the ones where her daughter had been most entirely herself. Amara was on her side, small and still, the covers pulled up to her chin. Her breathing was audible from the doorway. Not the thin, wire-tight wheeze of earlier. This was fuller, though not yet right. The breath of a child who needed the next step. Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed and put her hand on Amara's back. She could feel it through the thin pajama fabric, the slight irregularity of each breath, the way the chest rose in a way that was working too hard for what should have been effortless. She woke Amara gently. "Baby, Mama's home. I need you to sit up for me." Amara surfaced from sleep with the gradual blinking assent of a child moving between worlds. She sat up. Her hair was flattened on one side, and she had a small crease on her cheek from the pillowcase. She looked at her mother with the specific trust of a child who wakes to a parent's voice and understands, without needing to process it consciously, that the parent is there, and therefore it is going to be okay. Rosalind prepared the inhaler. She had done this enough times that the steps were their own language. The priming, the positioning, the quiet instruction. Breathe out first. Now breathe in slowly when I press it. Hold it. Good girl. Hold it. Amara held it. Her eyes, open and fixed on her mother's face, were completely calm. She was 7 years old, and she trusted Rosalind with a completeness that Rosalind sometimes found almost too large to hold. The weight of being someone's entire safe place, the responsibility of it, the privilege. "Again," Rosalind said. "One more, the second dose, the holding, the waiting." 4 minutes passed. Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed with her hand on Amara's back and counted the breaths. She did this the way she had taught herself to do it years ago, not anxiously, not holding her own breath in sympathy, the way she used to when Amara was younger, but steadily, keeping her own breathing, even so that Amara's body had something regular to unconsciously calibrate against. You gave your child your breath as a model. You made your body a kind of metronome and hoped their body would follow. Breath by breath, under her palm, Amara's chest began to change. The shallowness eased. The working quality, that tightness, that sense of effort, began to soften. The breaths came longer, slower, deeper. The small back beneath her hand rose and fell in a rhythm that was moving towards something that was simply breathing, not fighting to breathe, just breathing, the way breathing was supposed to be, the way most people did it all day long, without ever once thinking about what a gift that was. After 4 minutes, it was measurably better. After 6 minutes, it was right. Rosalind sat with her hand on her daughter's back and felt Amara breathe correctly and did not move for a long time. She did not think about the pharmacy or the authorization or the payment or Gerald Okonkwo or the 4 words that still sat in her chest unresolved. She thought about nothing. She sat inside the sound of her daughter breathing and let it be the only thing. Amara fell asleep again between one breath and the next, the way children do. No announcement, no transition, just suddenly surrendered completely to sleep, the way only children and the very trusting can manage. Her hand was around 2 of Rosalind's fingers. She had grabbed them at some point during the inhaler and not let go. Rosalind stayed until she was certain, until the breathing had been even and regular for long enough that she could believe it would stay that way. Then she carefully, slowly, extracted her fingers from Amara's grip, which required the specific dexterity of a parent who has performed this maneuver many times. The millimeter by millimeter withdrawal, the gentle replacement of her fingers with the edge of the blanket, so Amara's hand had something to close around. She stood. She looked at Amara for a moment in the orange nightlight glow, the gap-toothed mouth slightly open, the butterfly drawings overhead, the second drawer of the dresser with its sticker. She turned off the nightlight on her way out. Amara slept better in full dark. Rosalind sat at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet in the way apartments are quiet at 1 a.m., not silent. Never silent in Pine Hills, where there was always something. A car on the street, a television through a shared wall, the particular vocabulary of a building settling into itself at night. But quiet enough, still enough. She put the white paper bag on the table in front of her. She looked at it. Then she looked at her phone, which was now at 4% battery because she still hadn't charged it, which felt less petty now than it had in the parking lot earlier. She plugged it in. She made tea she didn't particularly want, because the act of making tea was something to do with her hands, while her mind began, slowly and carefully, to move. She thought about the sequence of tonight in the same methodical way she approached the invoicing work for Mrs. Baptista's cleaning company, starting from the known facts, moving outward. What she knew, a prescription that had been denied for 11 days, was authorized within minutes of midnight. The cost was covered by an account she could not identify. A doctor she had never met had called a pharmacist's personal cell phone, and someone, a customer, a man who had been in the store and was now gone, had left a message through a teenage cashier and a tired pharmacist that made no sense. She opened her phone browser. Her first search was practical. Arnold Palmer Hospital Pediatric Pulmonology, Dr. Adeyemi. The results came back quickly. A faculty listing, a brief biography, a photograph. Dr. Yemi Adeyemi, MD, PhD. Pediatric Pulmonology and Respiratory Medicine. Trained at Great Ormond Street Hospital, London. Fellowship at Johns Hopkins. Joined Arnold Palmer's staff in 2015. Area of research interest: emergency respiratory intervention in underserved pediatric populations. Rosalind read the biography twice. She noted the research interest: underserved pediatric populations. She noted that the phone number on the department's contact page was a general line. No after-hours personal number. No indication whatsoever that Dr. Adeyemi made personal calls to pharmacists at midnight, unless someone asked her to. Rosalind's second search: Patient Assistance Pharmacy Programs, Orlando Children. 17 results. She went through them systematically. Manufacturer programs, state programs, hospital foundation programs. Nothing that matched the account number Gerald had referenced. But then she hadn't asked Gerald for the account number. She hadn't thought to. Her third search, at 2:58 a.m., typed with the slightly blurry-eyed imprecision of someone who has been awake for 23 hours. Orlando Children's Health Foundation Pharmacy Assistants Anonymous. Third page of results. She clicked on something. It was an Orlando Sentinel article from March 2017. The headline was modest. A small community feature, not a front-page story. She had to expand the text to read it on her phone. The article described a partnership between the Shaquille O'Neal Foundation and Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children, formalized in 2016, that had established a fund specifically for emergency pediatric health needs in Central Florida. The fund covered prescription costs, emergency equipment, and after-hours medical consultations for families whose children fell through the gaps of the insurance system. The article quoted an Arnold Palmer administrator named Patricia Owens, describing the fund as a quiet but significant resource for families who have nowhere else to turn at critical moments. The article noted that the fund's donor had requested no public recognition. It noted that the fund had served 43 families in its first year of operation. Rosalind read the article once. Then she sat up very straight in her chair. She read it again. The tea had gone cold on the table next to her. The white paper bag was still there, the small purple canister inside it. Through the wall she could hear, faintly, barely, just enough, the sound of Amara breathing in her bedroom. Even. Regular. Easy. Rosalind put her phone face down on the table. She sat very still in the kitchen of her apartment on Brentwood Circle in Pine Hills at 3 in the morning, and she understood. Not everything. Not the exact mechanics. Not the phone call or the contact or the midnight authorization, or the full shape of what had moved through that CVS store tonight like a large, quiet, unhurried thing. But enough. She understood enough. Mama said keep going. She picked up her phone. She looked at the Orlando Sentinel article one more time. She looked at Amara's butterfly drawings, visible through the open kitchen doorway on the refrigerator. 12 careful wings, 12 different species, labeled in block letters by a 7-year-old hand. Rosalind Ferreira made a decision. She was going to find a way to say thank you. Not publicly, not in a way that made it a story or a moment or something with cameras. Just a quiet word passed in the direction it needed to go, person to person, the same way the kindness had arrived. The problem, and she recognized it immediately, clearly, with the practical mind of a woman who had spent 7 years solving problems with limited resources, was this: she had absolutely no idea how to reach Shaquille O'Neal. Lucille O'Neal had a way of filling a room without raising her voice. People who knew her, really knew her, not the version of her that existed in the margins of her son's biography, the footnoted mother, the background figure in the origin story, described this quality consistently and with a particular kind of reverence. She was not loud. She was not forceful in the way that announces itself. She was simply present in a way that made her presence felt. The way certain weather systems make themselves known before they arrive. Something in the air changes, and you look up. Shaquille O'Neal had spoken about his mother in virtually every significant interview of his adult life. Not the polished version, not the practiced anecdote deployed for a television audience. The real version, the one that surfaced when the interviewer asked the right question, and Shaq went somewhere quieter and more specific than his usual performance register allowed. He had spoken about her on Inside the NBA with Charles Barkley and Ernie Johnson, in a segment that aired in February 2016, that several people who worked on that show described afterward as the most unexpectedly moving thing they had filmed in years. He had spoken about her in his 2001 autobiography, Shaq Talks Back, written with Jackie McMullen, where he described Lucille as the fixed point around which his entire childhood oriented itself, the one thing that did not move when everything else did. And everything else moved frequently. His stepfather, Sergeant Philip Harrison, was United States Army, which meant the family relocated according to the Army's schedule, rather than their own preferences. Newark, New Jersey, where Shaquille was born in 1972, then Georgia, then Germany. Wildflecken, a small base town in Bavaria, where a young Shaquille O'Neal walked through a European village, being approximately the most conspicuous person in any given radius, and somehow, through the force of personality that would later make him one of the most recognized humans on the planet, made it work. Then back to the American South, San Antonio, Texas, where he played high school ball at Robert G. Cole High School, and began the process of becoming the thing he would become. Through all of it, Lucille moved with them, packed and unpacked, found new schools, new grocery stores, new routes through new cities, established home in places that were not yet home, and somehow made them home through the sheer insistence of her attention. She cooked, she prayed. She imposed structure on transients through the repetition of small, consistent things, the same dinner prayers, the same expectations around homework and respect, the same phrases said in the same tones until they became the architecture of her children's inner life. One of those phrases, "Keep going, don't stop, God's got it." Shaq had quoted it, or versions of it, in contexts ranging from his Hall of Fame induction speech in 2016 to late-night talk show appearances to the inside back cover of his autobiography. It was not a motto he had adopted strategically. It was something closer to the operating system installed in early childhood that had never been uninstalled, the instruction that ran underneath everything else. On the nights before big games, when the pressure was large enough to be physically felt in the chest. On the morning of June 19, 2000, when the Los Angeles Lakers won their first championship of the three-peat at the Staples Center, And Shaq sat in the locker room afterward with the trophy and thought about his mother. On the harder mornings that came after, the surgeries, the trades that surprised him, the years when the body started asking different questions than it used to. Keep going. Don't stop. God's got it. Over time, in the natural way that inherited phrases evolve when they pass through a person's specific experience, it had become something slightly different in his own usage. Compressed, simplified for passing on in moments when there was no time for the full version. When he said it to someone, quietly, in the space between one thing and the next, he said it the way it had been given to him, not as instruction, but as inheritance. Not, I am telling you what to do, but this was given to me, and now I am passing it to you, because you need it more than I do right now. Mama said keep going. He had said it before tonight. Not often, not publicly, not in ways that had been recorded or reported. He had said it to a man at a gas station in Baton Rouge in 2014, whose car had broken down, and who, while Shaq waited with him for the tow truck because it had seemed wrong to simply leave him there, had mentioned quietly that he was driving to a hospital 4 hours away because his father was dying, and this was the last trip he would probably ever make to see him alive. He had said it to a young woman outside a courthouse in Miami in 2017 who was crying in the particular controlled way of someone trying not to be seen crying in public, who declined to say what had happened inside but accepted the words when he offered them, along with a bottle of water from his car. He had said it other times, in other places, in the margins of a life large enough to contain many such moments, if you were paying attention. He had said it through a teenage cashier at a CVS on a February night, because the situation called for the message, and the message was the truest thing he had to give. What Rosalind did not know, what almost nobody outside a specific circle of Orlando's nonprofit and medical community knew, was the degree to which Shaq's philanthropic infrastructure in Central Florida had been deliberately, painstakingly built to function without him in the room. This was the part that the public version of celebrity generosity almost never captured, because the public version required a visible celebrity. The tabloid photograph, the social media post, the touching story with a beginning and a middle and a conclusion that included the famous person's face. The architecture of celebrity charity, as it existed in the public imagination, was fundamentally built around the moment of giving, the presentation, the revelation, the meeting. Shaq had done some of that. The Walmart layaway payoffs were public. The Christmas toy drives through his foundation were photographed. The celebrity basketball games that raised funds for Orlando area youth programs were attended and covered and posted. He understood the mechanism. The visibility created the donations. The donations created the impact. The impact required some visibility to sustain itself. He was not naive about the economics of public charity. But there was another layer underneath that one. A layer that had no photographs and no social media presence and no mechanism for becoming a story because it had been specifically engineered to prevent that outcome. The Patient Assistance Fund at Arnold Palmer was part of this layer. It had been established in conversations between Shaq's foundation director, a methodical woman named Diane Prescott, who had worked in nonprofit administration for 22 years and who Shaq trusted completely, and Arnold Palmer's Community Partnerships Department in early 2016. The conversations had taken approximately 6 months because both parties wanted to get the architecture right. The fund needed to be accessible quickly, not in 4 to 6 weeks, not through an application process that required forms and documentation and processing time that families in genuine emergencies simply did not have. It needed to be accessible at midnight on a Thursday, if midnight on a Thursday was when a child needed medicine. Dr. Yemi Adeyemi had been recruited to the fund's emergency network in 2017, a year after she joined Arnold Palmer's staff, by Patricia Owens, the administrator quoted in the Orlando Sentinel article Rosalind had found at 3 a.m. Adeyemi had said yes, because the fund's operating principle aligned precisely with her research interest and her medical philosophy. That the gap between a child's need and the system's response was most dangerous in the hours outside business hours, and that closing that gap required human beings willing to be reachable when the system was not. She kept her phone on. She answered calls she didn't recognize. She got out of bed when it was necessary. These were not things she did because she was extraordinary, she would have said, though she was. She did them because someone had built the infrastructure to make them possible, and someone had funded the infrastructure to make them functional. And the least she could do, given all of that, was answer her phone. Rosalind spent the morning after that February night constructing this picture piece by piece, the way you assemble something from scattered parts, without the box, to show you what the finished image should look like. She went back to the Orlando Sentinel article several times. She searched for the Shaquille O'Neal Foundation and found its website, professional, informative, listing programs and partnerships, and a mailing address in Orlando. She searched for Diane Prescott and found a LinkedIn profile and a brief mention in a nonprofit sector newsletter from 2018. She found a 2016 press release from Arnold Palmer announcing the community partnership without naming the donor, consistent with what the Sentinel article had described. She found a short clip on YouTube, a fan-uploaded segment from Inside the NBA, dated February 2016, of Shaq talking about his mother. She watched it twice in her kitchen at 4 a.m., with the sound low so she wouldn't wake Amara. He was in his studio chair, big as a piece of furniture himself, and Ernie Johnson had asked him something. The clip cut in mid-question so she couldn't hear what, and Shaq had paused in the way he paused when he was going somewhere real rather than somewhere performed. And then he had said, in a voice that was several registers quieter than his usual broadcast voice, "My mother used to say, 'Keep going, don't stop, God's got it.' I didn't always know what that meant when I was young. I know now." Charles Barkley had said something after that, probably funny, because Barkley always said something funny, and the clip ended. Rosalind sat with her phone in her hands, and the cold tea next to her, and Amara breathing evenly in the next room, and she felt the pieces arrange themselves into something she could see. A man who could not sleep, a pharmacy at midnight, a phone call that lasted 44 seconds, a physician who answered her phone, a fund that existed specifically for nights exactly like this one, and underneath all of it, holding it up the way foundations hold up buildings, invisible, structural, essential, a mother's voice saying the same 4 words across 40 years and 2 generations. Keep going. Don't stop. God's got it. Mama said keep going. Rosalind understood now, not just what had happened tonight. She understood the why of it, the specific shape of the generosity, the reason it had arrived without announcement and departed without acknowledgement and left only a message that was really someone else's message, borrowed and passed on. He had not done it to be seen. He had done it because his mother had installed something in him 40 years ago that activated in the presence of a certain kind of need, the specific need of a parent who has run out of options and is still standing at the counter, still pressing their hands flat on the surface, still refusing to leave. He had recognized it because he had watched it his entire childhood, and now Rosalind needed to find him. Not to tell the story, she had no interest in telling the story, not to make it public or post it or turn it into something it wasn't. Simply to say, person to person, quietly, the way the kindness had arrived, "I see you. I know it was you. Thank you." She had a mailing address for the foundation. She had a website contact form. She had the name Diane Prescott from a LinkedIn profile. She had, via the CVS, the name of a pediatric physician who had picked up her phone at midnight. And she had something else, something she hadn't yet fully recognized as a resource, because it was sitting in a chair 2 doors down the hall, asleep in star-patterned pajamas with a backpack full of homework. Rosalind looked at the clock, 5:14 a.m. Tiana would be up at 7 for school. And Tiana, Rosalind had observed over 2 years of babysitting and borrowed cups of sugar and impromptu conversations in the hallway, knew things. Not famous person things, not industry insider things, but the specific practical knowledge of a 17-year-old who had grown up in Orlando and paid attention to her city and could find, with her phone and her particular generation's native fluency with information, things that adults twice her age could not locate with the same effort. Rosalind would ask her. But first she needed to sleep. She put her head down on her arms at the kitchen table. Just for a moment, she told herself, just until the room stopped tilting slightly at the edges, the way rooms tilted when you had been awake for 24 hours, and she was asleep within 3 minutes. The white paper bag was still on the table. Through the wall, Amara breathed evenly in the dark. Outside, Pine Hills was doing what it always did in the hours before dawn, settling into the particular quiet that existed between the end of the night's business and the beginning of the morning's, the brief interval when the city belonged entirely to itself. Somewhere across town, in Windermere, the melatonin had done its work. Shaquille O'Neal was asleep. Neither of them knew, yet, that a 7-year-old girl was going to do what adults could not. She was going to find exactly the right words for the thing that needed saying, and she was going to do it with a pencil and a piece of notebook paper and the complete unself-conscious confidence of a child who has recently learned that handwriting matters. She was going to write a letter. 3 days after that Thursday night, on a Sunday afternoon in late February, Rosalind Ferreira walked back into the CVS on South Orange Avenue. It was 2:14 p.m. The store looked entirely different in daylight, the fluorescent lights less stark against the afternoon sun coming through the front windows, the aisles somehow wider and more ordinary, the pharmacy counter less like a barrier and more like furniture. The Valentine's Day candy display that Deshawn had been restocking at midnight was now a clearance display, the red and pink hearts marked down to half price because February 15th had arrived and the world had moved on from love to whatever came next. She had slept 4 hours at the kitchen table that Friday morning. She had woken to Amara standing next to her in pajamas, one hand on her arm, asking if she was okay with the specific gentle concern of a child who has learned to monitor her mother's well-being the way some children learn to monitor the weather, constantly, quietly, with an accuracy that would be remarkable in an adult. "I'm okay, baby," Rosalind had said. "I'm more than okay." Amara had accepted this, gone to the refrigerator, and poured herself a glass of orange juice with great concentration. She had breathed easily while she did it. She had breathed easily all of Friday and all of Saturday and into Sunday, the clear, untroubled breath of a child whose body had been given what it needed. And Rosalind had tracked each breath the way she tracked everything that mattered, quietly, continuously, with the vigilance that had become so habitual she no longer noticed she was doing it. On Friday afternoon, she had called Dr. Mensah's office when it opened at 8 and spoken to his nurse, who confirmed that a physician override had been processed through Arnold Palmer and that Amara's prior authorization had been formally approved and entered into the system. It would not lapse. It would not require renewal for 12 months, and the next refill would process automatically through Medicaid. The nurse said this in the tone of someone delivering routine administrative information. Rosalind thanked her and hung up and sat in her car in the Sun Care Services parking lot for 2 minutes before her shift started, just breathing. She had spent Friday evening thinking carefully about how to find Shaq. She had spent Saturday doing it. The Foundation's website contact form had a response time listed as 5 to 7 business days, which was honest but not useful. The mailing address was a post office box, registered to the Foundation's administrative office. She could send something there, and she intended to, but a letter sent to a post office box felt like a message put in a bottle. Technically dispatched, practically uncertain. The LinkedIn profile for Diane Prescott, Shaq's Foundation director, had a message function. which Rosalind had used on Saturday afternoon, typing a careful, brief note that identified herself by name and explained only that she wanted to express gratitude for something the Foundation had done for her family, and would welcome any guidance on how to do so appropriately. She had read the message 11 times before sending it, and it still felt insufficient. She sent it anyway. She had not yet found a way to reach Dr. Adeyemi directly. Arnold Palmer's general line went to a switchboard that did not connect personal calls to physician staff. The pulmonology department's email address was a general intake address. She had written an email to it, similarly careful and similarly brief, and sent it, similarly uncertain of its arrival. What she had not done yet was come back here. She wasn't entirely sure why she had, now. Gerald Okonkwo was not on the Sunday afternoon shift. She'd confirmed this when she called the store's main number that morning, asking under the pretense of checking pharmacy hours. The day pharmacist who answered had a different voice entirely. But there was something unfinished here, something she needed to close. This was where it had happened. This was the physical location of the thing she was trying to trace back to its source. And being here in the daylight, with Amara safely at home with Tiana again, Tiana had practically insisted, arriving at their door at 1 p.m. with her backpack and the serene authority of someone who had made a decision, felt like a necessary step in the process of understanding it. She walked to the pharmacy counter first. The day pharmacist, a young woman with a neat bun and the efficient manner of someone halfway through a long shift, confirmed that Gerald Okonkwo worked nights and would be in Monday through Saturday. Rosalind thanked her. She walked back toward the front of the store. She was almost at the door when she saw him. Deshawn was at the far end of the store near the household products, doing inventory with a handheld scanner. He was wearing his red CVS vest over a gray hoodie, the name tag still in block letters, earbuds in one ear and the other ear available for the ambient sounds of the store, in the professional way of someone who has learned to be present in two worlds simultaneously. He was taller than she'd expected. She had only ever seen him from across the store in the dark, and in the daylight he resolved into a specific person. Tall, maybe 5'11", with the slightly folded posture of a teenager who had grown quickly and hadn't yet fully inhabited the new height. He had a careful face, watchful eyes. He looked up as she approached. There was a half-second of blankness, the neutral expression of a retail worker encountering a customer in a non-customer service zone, and then something shifted as recognition arrived. He pulled the earbud out. "You were here," he said. "Not a question. Thursday night." "I was," Rosalind said. "I'm Rosalind. I was at the pharmacy counter." He nodded slowly. He was still holding the scanner, but his attention had reorganized completely around this conversation, which told her something about him. He understood immediately that this mattered, and he adjusted accordingly. "I remember," he said. "Is your daughter okay?" The question surprised her. Not its content, but its immediacy. That this was the first thing he asked, before anything else. "She is," Rosalind said. "She's breathing well. Thank you for asking." He nodded again, and she could see the relief in it, genuine and unperformed. The relief of a 17-year-old who had been carrying a small piece of that night with him for 3 days, and was now setting it down. "I came to ask you something," Rosalind said, "about the man who was here that night." Deshawn's expression didn't change exactly, but it became more careful, more considered. The expression of someone deciding how much they know and how much of what they know belongs to them to share. She recognized it and respected it. "He asked me not to say anything," Deshawn said. "Not defensive, just factual." "I know," Rosalind said. "I'm not asking you to confirm it. I already know who it was. I'm just trying to figure out how to say thank you." Something in Deshawn's face relaxed at that. The tension of being asked to betray a confidence dissolved when he understood that the confidence was already resolved. He looked at her for a moment with the evaluating gaze of someone assessing the sincerity of a statement. Then he said, Come here a second." He led her to the candy aisle, the clearance Valentine's display, the red and pink hearts at half price. He leaned against the shelf and crossed his arms over the scanner, and looked at her directly, in the way that some young people do when they have decided to be completely honest, as though they are marshalling themselves for it. "I grew up in Orlando," he said. "My whole life. You know how many times I've seen Shaq in this city?" "How many?" "Enough," Deshawn said. "He's everywhere and nowhere, you know. Like you'll see him at a car wash getting his truck detailed same as anybody. Or you'll hear from somebody's cousin that he showed up at some random kid's birthday party because the kid wrote him a letter. He does things. And he never wants anyone to make a big thing out of it." Rosalind listened. "That night," Deshawn continued, more quietly now, "when he was walking out, he came to my register and he was just regular, paid for his stuff, and then he stopped." Deshawn paused, looking at the floor for a moment, as if reconstructing it. "He said something about the woman at the pharmacy. He told me to call a number if you needed anything else that night. And then he said to tell you something through Gerald." "Mama said keep going," Rosalind said. "Yeah." Deshawn looked at her. "I didn't know what it meant." "I do now," she said. A silence opened between them, comfortable and brief. The store moved around them, a child asking a parent something 2 aisles over, the beep of a register at the front, the soft rock from the overhead speakers doing what it always did. "Can I ask you something?" Rosalind said. "Sure." "When he left, did he look back? Did he check to see what happened?" Deshawn thought about this carefully. She could see him going back to Thursday night, locating the specific memory, examining it. "No," he said finally. "He walked straight out, didn't turn around." Rosalind absorbed this. "That's kind of the whole thing with him, isn't it?" she said. It came out not quite as a question. "Yeah," Deshawn said, and something in his voice carried the weight of a young man who had grown up in a city where this person was a permanent part of the landscape and had spent 17 years accumulating a more complete picture than most people ever got. "That's kind of the whole thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He did say one more thing. At the register, before the stuff about the phone number." Rosalind waited. Deshawn uncrossed his arms. He looked slightly away, the way people look when they are recalling something precisely, making sure to get it right before they hand it over. He said, "Tell whoever needs to hear it. The big ones always find the people who need them." He paused. "I didn't know what that meant then either." Rosalind looked at him. "Do you now?" she asked. Deshawn considered it with the genuine seriousness of a 17-year-old confronting something that had been sitting in him, unresolved, for 3 days. "I think," he said slowly, "he wasn't talking about himself." "No," Rosalind agreed. "He wasn't." She thanked him. She meant it the same way she had meant it with Tiana, in the complete way, the way that needed no elaboration because the other person could feel the full weight of it. Deshawn nodded. He put his earbud back in. He went back to the inventory scanner. At the door, Rosalind paused in the same spot where the automatic doors opened onto the February cold. Warmer today, the cold snap broken, the sun actually present and doing its work. She looked back at the pharmacy counter, quiet now in the Sunday afternoon light, the scratched plastic barrier catching a reflection of the windows. She thought about what Deshawn had said. The big ones always find the people who need them. And then his correction, his 17-year-old pay attention correction. I think he wasn't talking about himself. He was talking about the mothers. He was talking about the women who stood at counters at midnight with their hands pressed flat, who had been looking for the people who needed them, their children, their charges, their people, their entire lives. Who were the big ones all along, in every way that actually mattered? Who carried things that made a 7-foot man's burdens look light? Who kept going? Rosalind walked out into the Sunday sun. She had 3 things to do when she got home. First, call Tiana's grandmother and arrange to repay the babysitting with a proper dinner this week, because Tiana deserved more than $10 and a plate of food. Second, write that email to Dr. Adeyemi's department again, this time without being careful, just honest, just the plain truth of what that midnight phone call had meant to a mother in Pine Hills. Third, and most importantly, sit down at the kitchen table with Amara and explain, in the simple, true language that 7-year-olds deserved, that a kind man had helped them when they needed it, that he was very tall and very quiet about his kindness, and that he had learned his goodness from his mother, the same way Rosalind hoped Amara was learning hers. And then she was going to give Amara a piece of notebook paper and a pencil, and she was going to let her daughter do what children do when they are given the right materials and the right reason. She was going to let her write. It took Amara 4 tries. This was not because she didn't know what she wanted to say. Amara Ferreira almost always knew what she wanted to say. Her second-grade teacher, Ms. Oduya, had noted this in 2 separate parent conferences, describing it with the particular admiration of an educator who encounters genuine expressiveness rarely enough to recognize it clearly when it arrives. The problem was not the words. The problem was the pencil, specifically the way it kept making letters that looked wrong to Amara, who had strong opinions about her own handwriting, and would rather start over entirely than submit something that looked like it was written by someone in a hurry or someone who didn't care. The first try was abandoned because the letter R in Rosalind, she had decided to start by explaining who her mother was, came out looking like a P had attempted to become an R and given up halfway. Amara studied it for 4 seconds, turned the paper over, and started again. The second try ended when she misspelled breathing. She wrote breathing, looked at it, said, "That's not right," with the quiet certainty of a child who has been told that spelling matters and has taken this seriously, and flipped to a new sheet. The third try reached the 3rd sentence before Amara stopped, reread what she had written, and decided she had begun in the wrong place. She had started with facts, her name, her age, her school, and realized as she read them back that facts were not the right beginning for this particular letter. The right beginning was something else, something she couldn't name exactly but could feel the shape of, the way you feel the shape of a word you know but can't quite retrieve. She sat with the pencil in her hand for a while. Rosalind, at the kitchen table across from her, did not rush her. She drank her tea and watched her daughter think in the specific way Amara thought, completely still, eyes fixed on a middle distance that existed somewhere between the paper and the refrigerator, the butterfly drawings visible behind her head on the wall. Then Amara picked up the pencil. She put it to the paper. She wrote the first line of the 4th try without stopping. After that, she didn't stop at all. She wrote in pencil on 3 sheets of notebook paper, the wide-ruled kind from her school supply pack, with the faint blue lines and the red margin line on the left that she was careful to stay to the right of, because Ms. Oduya had explained that the margin line existed for a reason. Her handwriting was the large, effortful handwriting of a child who has learned to form letters correctly and is still at the stage where correctness requires visible effort. Each letter placed deliberately, with space between the words that was slightly too generous, but carried in it the sincerity of someone who wanted to be understood. Rosalind did not read the letter while Amara wrote it. She had made a decision about this, that the letter was Amara's, not hers, and that the privacy of its composition mattered. She busied herself with the dinner dishes and the laundry and the small maintenance of a Sunday evening, and she let Amara write. When Amara finished, she said, "Mama, can you read it and tell me if it's okay?" Rosalind sat down. The letter read, "Dear very tall kind man, my name is Amara, and I am 7. My mom told me you helped us when I was sick, and I could not breathe good. She said you are very tall, but you did not want anyone to know it was you, which I think is the nicest kind of nice, because most people want everyone to know when they are nice, but you did not want that. I have reactive airway disease. That means sometimes my lungs forget how to do their job, and my mom has to remind them with medicine. My doctor is Dr. Mensa, and he is very nice also. But you helped get me the medicine when we could not get it, and that is why I can breathe now. My favorite things are butterflies. I know a lot about butterflies. Did you know that a monarch butterfly can fly 3,000 miles? I think that is incredible. I have a notebook where I draw them. I have drawn 41 different kinds. My mom says I am very focused when I draw butterflies, which I think means she is proud of me, even though she says it in a way that also sounds a little bit like she is saying I should focus on other things too. I heard you told my mom, Mama said keep going. My mom told me that is what your mom used to say to you when things were hard. I think your mom sounds like my mom. My mom keeps going every single day. She keeps going even when she is tired, and even when things are hard, and even when I am sick. And she is scared even though she does not let me see that she is scared, because she does not want me to be scared too. But I know anyway, because I can tell. I think kids can always tell. You helped my mom keep going on a night when it was very hard to keep going. I want you to know that. Also, I want you to know that I can run now. My mom said I should tell you that. I ran to the mailbox and back, and it did not hurt my chest at all. I ran 3 times. My mom watched from the front step, and she was smiling the whole time. I could see her from the mailbox. I do not know your name, but my mom does, and she said you are very famous for basketball, which I do not know a lot about, but she showed me a picture, and you are very, very tall. I hope being that tall is fun. I think it would be useful for getting things off high shelves. Thank you for the breathing medicine. Thank you for being the kind of nice that does not need anyone to see it. I think that is the best kind. Your friend, Amara, age 7. P.S. I drew you a butterfly on the back. It is a monarch because they go very far and do not give up. I thought you would like that one. On the back of the 3rd page, in the careful, deliberate lines of a child who had drawn this particular species 41 times and knew it deeply, was a monarch butterfly. Its wings were slightly asymmetrical in the way that handmade things are asymmetrical. Not from carelessness, but from the honest variation of a human hand. The orange was colored in with an orange pencil, pressing firmly for the deep sections and lightly for the edges where the color faded. The black border lines were done with a regular pencil, outlined twice for thickness. The small white dots along the wing edges were added one at a time, each one a small, deliberate point. It was, by any measure, a good butterfly. Rosalind read the letter once without speaking. Then she put it down on the table and looked at the refrigerator for a moment. At the butterfly drawings, at the careful labels in block letters, at this record of her daughter's sustained attention to beautiful things over the course of a year. "Is it okay?" Amara asked. She was watching her mother's face with the evaluating precision she always brought to things that mattered to her. "It's more than okay," Rosalind said. Her voice was completely steady, which cost her something, but Amara didn't need to see the cost right now. What Amara needed to see was that the letter was right, that she had done the thing correctly. "It's exactly right." Amara accepted this with a small, satisfied nod. Then she slid off her chair and went to the refrigerator and got herself a glass of juice, moving through the kitchen with the easy, unthinking physicality of a child whose body is simply working, legs carrying her, lungs filling and emptying behind her ribs without complaint. The whole magnificent ordinary machinery of a healthy child running on a Sunday evening in Pine Hills. Rosalind watched her and did not say anything. The next morning, she addressed an envelope to the Shaquille O'Neal Foundation, at the post office box address she had found on the website. She wrote Amara's name in the top left corner as the return address, because the letter was Amara's, and it should arrive as Amara's, not filtered through an adult's framing. She bought a stamp at the CVS on South Orange Avenue. The same store, the same fluorescent lights, different time of day. And she stood at the mailbox outside for a moment, with the envelope in her hand. She thought about Thursday night, the pharmacy counter, the scratched plastic barrier, her hands pressed flat on the cold surface. the $43, the 11 days. She thought about Gerald's face when he came back to the window, the specific quality of what had crossed it, something between surprise and relief, and the satisfaction of a decent person who has just watched the world, briefly and unexpectedly, behave decently. She thought about Deshaun in the candy aisle, serious-faced, saying, "That's kind of the whole thing with him. He never does." She thought about Amara at the mailbox, running all the way there and all the way back, 3 times, her gap-toothed smile visible from the front step where Rosalind had stood watching, with her hand over her mouth so Amara wouldn't see it trembling. She put the letter in the mailbox. She heard it land. She walked back to her car and sat inside it for a moment. In the parking lot of the same CVS, where 11 days of bureaucratic silence had been resolved in 9 minutes by a network of people connected by one man's quiet, unglamorous, persistent belief that the right response to a mother pressing her hands flat on a counter at midnight was not a spectacle. It was a phone call. It was a fund that existed in the dark where no one could photograph it. It was 4 words borrowed from a mother in Newark and carried forward 40 years and handed to a stranger in a burgundy coat who needed them more than he did. It was, in the end, just a letter. 3 pages of wide-ruled notebook paper and a monarch butterfly on the back, sent to a post office box in Orlando from a 7-year-old in Pine Hills who had drawn 41 butterflies in a notebook and could run to the mailbox and back without her chest hurting. It was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not to Shaq directly. It didn't work that way, and hadn't for years. The Foundation's post office box was managed by Diane Prescott, who collected the mail 3 times a week and sorted it in the methodical way she sorted everything in her professional life, by category, by urgency, by the specific quality of attention each piece required. She had been doing this for long enough to know, usually within 30 seconds of opening an envelope, what kind of letter she was holding. There were the donation inquiries, the partnership proposals, the event requests, the thank you notes from organizations the Foundation had supported. There were the letters from children, which occupied their own category entirely, and which Diane handled with a particular care that she did not apply to any other category because she understood their weight in a way that had nothing to do with professional responsibility and everything to do with being a person. She opened Amara's letter on a Wednesday morning, standing at her desk in the Foundation's small administrative office on West Church Street, in downtown Orlando, still in her coat, because she had not yet had her first cup of coffee and was not fully committed to being indoors yet. She read it once. She set it down. She took her coat off. She sat down. She read it again. Then she picked up her phone and called Shaq. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was awake and not in a meeting, which on a Wednesday morning was not guaranteed. He had TNT production commitments in Atlanta most weeks, flight schedules that arranged themselves around taping, and a calendar that Diane coordinated with his personal assistant and still found occasionally bewildering in its density. But this Wednesday he was in Orlando. She knew this because she had his schedule, and because she had heard, through the specific grapevine that existed between people who worked closely with someone over many years, that he had been in Orlando since Monday and was not leaving until Thursday. "I have something you need to see," she said. "Can you come by this afternoon?" She knew better than to tell him what it was over the phone, not because it was sensitive, it wasn't, in any official sense, but because Diane Prescott had worked with Shaquille O'Neal for long enough to know that certain things needed to arrive in person, with the full physical reality of paper in hand and ink on a page. Some things lost something essential in transmission. This was one of those things. He came by at 2 p.m. She handed him the envelope without preamble. He looked at the return address, Amara Ferreira, Brentwood Circle, Orlando Fung, and something shifted in his face, small and private, a recognition that moved through him before he could arrange his expression around it. He read the letter standing at Diane's desk. He did not sit down. He was the kind of person who read standing up, when the thing he was reading required the full length of himself, when sitting felt like a constriction. He read it through once, unhurriedly, his face doing the thing it did when he was somewhere real, the performance register dropping away, the large public face replaced by something quieter and more specific and considerably more human. He got to the postscript. He turned the page over. He looked at the monarch butterfly for a long time. Diane watched him. She had learned over the years that watching him in moments like this was one of the privileges of her job. Not the public moments, not the championships and the ceremonies and the television appearances, but these private ones. The moments when the full complexity of the person was briefly visible before the world's demands reassembled themselves around him. He did not say anything for a while. When he finally spoke, his voice was at the low end of its register, the end that didn't reach television. "How old did she say she is?" "7, Diane said. He nodded slowly. He turned the letter back to the front and reread 2 specific lines. She could see his eyes moving, knew from the way he stopped and held on those lines which ones they were even from across the desk. "I think kids can always tell. And I could see her from the mailbox." He folded the letter carefully. Not quickly. Carefully. With the attention you give to something you are going to keep. "I'm taking this," he said. "I know," Diane said. His home office in Windermere was a room that told the truth about him in the way that private spaces always tell the truth about people, regardless of what the public version of the person looks like. It was large. It had to be, architecturally. But it was not the room of someone performing success at themselves. There were no championship trophies on display in here, no framed magazine covers, no artifacts of the celebrity life arranged for the impression they would make on a visitor. Those things existed elsewhere in the house, in the appropriate places. This room was working space, thinking space, the space he came to when he needed to be the version of himself that did not require an audience. There was a desk, substantial dark wood, the surface occupied by a laptop, a legal pad, 2 coffee mugs in various states of use, a charging cable that had achieved the specific state of tangle that charging cables achieve when nobody addresses them for several weeks, and a small collection of objects that had been there long enough to constitute a permanent landscape rather than a decoration. The Lakers bobblehead was in the right corner. It had been with him since 2000, the year of the first championship, the year that everything clicked into the shape it had been moving toward since he first picked up a basketball on a military base in Georgia, and understood, at a cellular level, the relationship between his body and that ball, and what was possible in the space between them. The bobblehead was not valuable in any objective sense. It was slightly faded, and one of the sneakers had a small chip out of it from a move somewhere between Miami and Phoenix. He kept it because it was the first one Lucille had given him after the championship, handing it to him in the locker room with the same expression she used when she was proud of him and determined not to make too much of it, and he had understood that expression completely because he had been studying it his entire life. On Tuesday mornings, when he was in Orlando and not in Atlanta, or on the road for an appearance or in any of the other places his life required him to be, he sat at this desk for 2 hours before anything else started. He reviewed foundation business. He went through the things Diane sent him. He answered the calls he had not answered the day before. He thought about the things that needed thinking about, undisturbed, before the day assembled its full demands. He had been at this desk when Diane called. He had driven to her office and back, and arrived home at 3 p.m., and he had gone directly to this room. He put the letter on the desk. He put the Lakers bobblehead on top of it, gently, with the corner of the base holding down the top edge of the folded paper, and he sat back in his chair and looked at it. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Charles Barkley. He let it ring twice, which was 1 ring longer than he usually made Charles wait, and then he answered, "Yo." Charles's voice came through at its characteristic volume, which was the volume of a man who had never once considered the possibility that he might be too loud and had no intention of starting now. He was calling about something having to do with a bet they had made about a college basketball game, the specifics of which Shaq had entirely forgotten, and within 30 seconds, the conversation had achieved the altitude of two old friends arguing about something that didn't matter, which was the register they defaulted to because it was comfortable, and because after 20 years of friendship, the arguments that didn't matter were the ones that felt most like home. Shaq was laughing within 45 seconds. Fully, loudly. The laugh that made television producers happy because it was completely uncontrollable and completely real. He swiveled in his chair. He put his feet on the edge of the desk. He argued back about the bet, with the full investment of a man who had absolutely nothing riding on it, except the pleasure of the argument. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, he was still smiling, the particular residual warmth of a conversation that reminds you that your life contains people who have known you long enough to argue with you about things that don't matter, which is one of the better things a life can contain. He looked at the desk, the bobblehead, the folded letter beneath it, the monarch butterfly on the back of the third page, which he could not see right now but knew was there, orange pressing into orange at the wing centers, black border lines drawn twice for thickness, white dots placed one at a time along the edges. He reached forward and picked up the letter. He unfolded it. He read the last page again. Not all of it, just the part near the bottom, the part that had stopped him the first time and stopped him again now. I do not know your name, but my mom does, and she said you are very famous for basketball, which I do not know a lot about, but she showed me a picture, and you are very, very tall. I hope being that tall is fun. I think it would be useful for getting things off high shelves. He exhaled slowly through his nose. It was not quite a laugh, and not quite something else. It was the sound a person makes when they have been seen clearly by someone who had absolutely no investment in flattering them, no awareness of the performance expected of them, no knowledge of the scaffolding of public life that usually stood between Shaquille O'Neal and being seen clearly. A 7-year-old with reactive airway disease and 41 butterflies in a notebook and a gap-toothed smile her mother could see from a mailbox. He refolded the letter. He placed it back under the bobblehead. Then he did something he had not done in this room in a while. He sat quietly. Not reviewing anything, not planning anything, not moving toward the next task on the list of tasks that constituted his day. Just sitting in the afternoon light coming through the window. Orlando light, familiar and specific. The light of the city that had made him in all the ways that mattered, and being still inside it. He thought about his mother. He thought about her hand on the wall. He thought about the phone call that had lasted 44 seconds, and Dr. Adeyemi getting out of bed, and Gerald Okonkwo looking up from his counter in a particular way. He thought about Deshaun keeping a secret with the serious competence of a young man who understood that some things were not his to share, and he thought that Deshaun was going to be fine, that whatever came next for Deshaun was going to be navigated by someone with better instincts than most people twice his age. He thought about Amara Ferreira running 3 times to the mailbox and back, her mother watching from the front step, smiling the whole time. He had not known about the running. He had not known about the counting. The letter had given him something he had not expected to receive. Not gratitude. He had not needed the gratitude. That was not why any of it had happened. But something more specific than gratitude. Something that could only have come from a 7-year-old who didn't know who he was, and therefore had no reason to give him anything other than the exact truth of her experience. I could see her from the mailbox. He reached forward and took a photograph of the letter with his phone. Not to post, not to share. He moved the bobblehead and photographed the back of the 3rd page as well. The monarch butterfly, its asymmetrical wings, the white dots placed one at a time. He set the phone down. He put the letter back. He put the bobblehead back on top of it, in its corner. the slight chip in the sneaker facing inward the way it always faced. He had carried this small, faded object through 4 championship cities, and a Hall of Fame induction, and more hotel rooms than he could count. And it had never meant exactly the same thing twice, because meaning accumulated. It didn't stay still. It grew new layers, the way trees grew rings. It meant something new today. He was reaching for his laptop. The day was not finished. There were things to return to. Atlanta on Thursday, production notes to review, a call with Diane about the Foundation's spring programming. When he stopped, he picked up his phone again. He opened it. Not to post, not to call. He opened the photograph of the letter and looked at it for a moment on the screen. Then he scrolled to the photograph of the butterfly. He looked at it for longer than he meant to. A monarch butterfly, drawn by a 7-year-old hand. Orange pressing firmly at the center, fading at the edges. Black borders doubled for thickness. White dots, each one placed deliberately. Each one a small decision made by a child who knew this species well enough to draw it 41 times and still take it seriously the 42nd. They fly 3,000 miles, she had written. They do not give up. He put his phone in his pocket. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the Foundation's internal communications and wrote a short note to Diane, 3 lines, characteristically unpunctuated, asking her to make sure that Amara Ferreira's prior authorization renewal was flagged in the system a full 60 days before its expiration, so that what happened in February would not have the opportunity to happen again. He asked Diane to handle it quietly, and not to reach out to the family. They had done enough reaching. Let them be. He sent the note. He reached for the first of the 2 coffee mugs, and discovered it was cold. He got up to go to the kitchen for a fresh one, stepping out of the office and into the hallway of his house. His Orlando house, the one closest to where it all started. And the afternoon light was doing something specific to the hallway floor, coming through a high window at an angle that made a rectangle of gold on the tile. He stepped over it without thinking. Then he stepped back and stood in it for a moment, the way you stand in a patch of sunlight when you have the rare luxury of noticing it. Orlando in February, when the cold snap broke, the sun coming back, a child running to a mailbox. He went to get his coffee. On the corner of his desk, beneath a Lakers bobblehead with a chipped sneaker, held down by the weight of something small and faded and irreplaceable, a letter waited. 3 pages of wide-ruled notebook paper, the careful handwriting of a child who had learned that letters mattered and taken this seriously. Words that had found their way through a post office box and a Wednesday morning and a 2-hour drive to the exact place where they were supposed to land. And on the back of the 3rd page, a monarch butterfly, going very far, not giving up. Some things you keep. Not because they remind you of what you did, because they remind you of what you are, what was put into you, long ago, by a woman with her hand on a wall in a 4th-floor apartment on Sussex Avenue in Newark, who said the same thing every time the world got heavy. Keep going. Don't stop. God's got it. And then, one February night in Orlando, at a CVS at midnight, through a teenage cashier and a tired pharmacist, through a 44-second phone call and a physician who answered her phone, and a fund that lived in the dark where no camera could reach it. Through all of that, arriving finally at a 7-year-old girl with a notebook and a pencil and 41 butterflies and lungs that were, at last, simply doing what lungs were made to do. The message had been delivered. Mama said, keep going. She had. They all had. And in the handwritten note at the bottom of Amara's letter, below her daughter's name, below the age in parentheses, in the small, careful cursive of a woman who had spent 11 days waiting, and 1 night standing at a counter, and 3 weeks processing what the night had meant, Rosalind had added 4 words that Shaq had read first, before anything else. The moment he unfolded the paper, she ran 3 times. And then, underneath that, smaller, almost an afterthought, almost too quiet to be meant for anyone but herself. I counted. On the surface, this is a story about a famous man doing a kind thing. But that is the smallest version of it, and the smallest version does not do it justice. On a Thursday in February 2019, a 7'1" man who had won 4 NBA championships, released platinum rap albums, built a business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and become one of the most recognized human beings on the planet, drove himself to a CVS pharmacy because he could not sleep. He was not there to be generous. He was there for melatonin. He did not go looking for a moment. The moment found him in the vitamin aisle, arriving in the form of a woman's voice doing the hardest thing a voice can do, staying steady when everything inside the person it belongs to is anything but. He stood still for 90 seconds. Those 90 seconds are the heart of the story. Not the phone call, not the authorization, not the payment. The 90 seconds in which a man who had every reason to keep walking, who was tired, who valued his privacy, who had been burned before by the way public generosity became public spectacle, stood in the vitamin aisle of a fluorescent-lit store and thought about his mother, and chose. Not the dramatic choice, not the visible one, the quiet one, the phone call made with a cupped hand, the word to a teenage cashier, the exit through a door he did not look back through. The choice that left no fingerprints except 4 words, borrowed from a woman in Newark who had taught them to him across kitchen tables and through apartment walls, and in the hallways of military housing in 3 different states. Mama said keep going. Rosalind Ferreira was not a victim. The story is careful about this. She was a 34-year-old woman with 2 jobs, a sick daughter, $43 in her checking account, and 11 days of bureaucratic silence behind her. She was standing at a pharmacy counter at midnight, not because she had run out of options. She was standing there because she had not run out of options. Standing there was the option. Refusing to leave was the strategy. Pressing her hands flat on the cold counter and saying, "That's my baby," in a voice that cracked only once and was sealed back up almost immediately. That was not weakness. That was the kind of strength that doesn't photograph well. The kind that doesn't trend. The kind that shows up in the bodies of ordinary people doing the hardest, least celebrated labor there is. Keeping a child safe, in a world that makes it unnecessarily difficult to do so. The insurance system failed her. The prior authorization system failed her. The bureaucratic process that was supposed to protect her daughter had spent 11 days proving its own inadequacy. None of that broke her. She drove to CVS at midnight, and she stood at the counter, and she did not leave. When Shaq heard her voice, he recognized it. He recognized it because he had grown up watching the woman who raised him use that exact voice against the exact same kind of world. The world that made you wait, made you justify, made you stand at counters proving your need before it acknowledged your humanity. He recognized Rosalind because she reminded him of Lucille. And you don't walk past Lucille, the 7-year-old with the gap-toothed smile and the butterfly notebook and the reactive airway disease, did something that no adult in this story managed to do. She told the truth simply. Not the carefully worded truth of Rosalind's LinkedIn message to Diane Prescott. Not the professionally calibrated truth of Gerald Okonkwo's midnight conversation with a physician he'd never met. Not the quiet, strategic truth of Shaq's 44-second phone call. Amara's truth. I can run now. I ran 3 times. I could see my mom from the mailbox. That's it. That's the whole thing. The elaborate infrastructure of generosity, the foundation, the fund, the emergency network, the after-hours authorizations, the patient assistance account that existed in the dark where no camera could reach it. All of it, every piece, had been built and funded and maintained so that a 7-year-old girl in Pine Hills could run to a mailbox and back without her chest hurting. 3 times. Her mother counted. Lucille O'Neill is not a character who appears in this story directly. She appears only in memory, only in a man's 90-second hesitation in a vitamin aisle, only in 4 words passed forward across 4 decades, like a relay baton that never hits the ground. But she is, in the truest sense, the reason any of it happened. She installed something. Call it values, call it conscience, call it the specific orientation toward need that develops in a child who watches a good parent navigate a hard world with grace. Whatever you call it, she installed it early and she installed it deep. And 40 years later it activated in the presence of a particular sound. A mother's voice, controlled and careful, pressed against its own limits, and sent a large, quiet man to his phone in the vitamin aisle. The phrase she gave him, "Keep going, don't stop, God's got it," is not a complicated phrase. It does not require a theology degree, or a philosophy background, or a significant intelligence to understand. It requires only that you have been in a place where keeping going was genuinely difficult, and someone who loved you said those words and meant them completely. Lucille said them to Shaq. Shaq passed them to Rosalind. Rosalind explained them to Amara. Amara drew a monarch butterfly on the back of a letter and labeled it in the careful block letters of a child who had learned that handwriting matters. The butterfly travels 3,000 miles. It does not give up. Throughout this story, small mysteries accumulated. A phone call no one saw. A payment no one could name. A message that made no sense. An authorization that appeared at midnight from a doctor nobody had called. Readers expecting a dramatic revelation, a public reunion, a tearful moment on television, a viral video, did not get one. What they got instead was this: a handwritten note at the bottom of a child's letter, below Amara's name, below the age in parentheses, in the small, careful cursive of a woman who had spent 11 days waiting, and one night being the kind of brave that nobody sees and nobody claps for. She ran 3 times. I counted. That's the cliffhanger. That's what everything was pointing toward. Not a revelation, a receipt, evidence that it worked. Proof of concept for every quiet, unfunded, unphotographed act of human decency that happens in the gap between what systems provide and what people actually need. A mother counting her daughter's footsteps, finally able to, because for years, 3 hospitalizations, 11-day authorization limbo, $43 in a checking account, a burgundy coat 1 winter too old. She could not take any of those footsteps for granted. Now she could count them, instead of worrying about them. 3 times, to the mailbox and back. Every day in America, in cities that look like Orlando and neighborhoods that look like Pine Hills, parents are standing at pharmacy counters at midnight. Not because they are irresponsible, not because they didn't plan, not because they failed some test of personal responsibility that the system requires them to pass before their child's lungs get to work correctly. Because the prior authorization process takes 11 days. Because the generic makes their child vomit. Because the brand name costs $380 and they have $43. Because the insurance line transfers you to a different department and the call drops after 18 minutes on hold and the man with the tired voice says, "Call back during business hours." Because the gap between what a child needs and what a system provides is real, and it falls most heavily on the people who can least afford to fall into it. Shaq understood this. Not from a policy paper or a charity brochure. From Sussex Avenue, Newark. From a 4th-floor apartment. From a woman's hand pressed flat on a wall and a voice that stayed steady because it had to. Because the child in the next room needed it to. He understood it in his body, the way you understand the things that are taught to you before you have words for them. And so he built something. Quietly, in the dark, without a naming opportunity on a wall. A fund, a network, a system of people who answered their phones at midnight. An infrastructure of decency that could activate in the gap and close it. Not permanently, not systemically, not for everyone. But for Amara Ferreira, on one cold February night, when her mother had $43 and a daughter who could not breathe. That's not nothing. That's, in fact, everything. Somewhere in Windermere, Florida, in a home office with high ceilings and a working desk, under a Lakers bobblehead with a chipped sneaker, a letter waits. 3 pages, wide-ruled notebook paper, the careful handwriting of a child who takes things seriously, and on the back, a monarch butterfly. Orange at the center, fading at the edges, black borders doubled for thickness. White dots, each one placed deliberately, one at a time, by a hand that had practiced this particular species 41 times and still had not gotten tired of it. The butterfly that travels 3,000 miles. The butterfly that does not give up. Beside it, in a 7-year-old's block letters, a label, Monarch. And below that, added later in pencil, in smaller letters that might have been an afterthought, or might have been the most deliberate thing on the page. For the man who helped Mama keep going. Some things you frame. Some things you just keep. Some things you put under a bobblehead on a desk, in a quiet room in the city that made you. And you let them sit there, accumulating meaning the way good things do. Slowly, without announcement, in the ordinary light of an ordinary afternoon in Orlando, Florida, where a little girl is running, 3 times, to the mailbox and back. The end. And that is the story of a quiet night in Orlando that nobody was supposed to know about. A mother who refused to leave that counter. A little girl who ran to the mailbox 3 times. And a giant man in a black hoodie who heard a voice in a vitamin aisle and thought about his mother. No cameras, no announcement, no moment made for the internet. Just kindness. Doing what kindness does best. Arriving quietly, in the dark, exactly when it is needed most. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. It could be a small town, a big city, or somewhere in between. We read every single one, and honestly, seeing where our community comes from never gets old. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about your own mother, or your own hard nights, or the stranger who showed up when you needed them most, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this story reach someone who might need to hear it today. Someone who might be pressing their hands flat on a counter somewhere right now, running low on options, needing to be reminded that the world still has quiet giants in it. And if you believe that kindness like this deserves to spread, subscribe to this channel. Every story we tell is about real people doing real things that the news never covers, the internet never trends, and the world almost never sees. We find those stories. We tell them the way they deserve to be told. So join us, because the world has more Rosalinds in it than we know, more Amaras, more Gerald Okonkwo's answering their phones, more Deshawns keeping secrets with quiet dignity, and every now and then, more giants in black hoodies who hear something in a vitamin aisle and choose, in 90 seconds of silence, to do the right thing. The video on your screen right now is waiting for you. Click it. We will see you there.